समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
आप समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
It will take the next some days to decode all the multiple messages sent by the power huddle between Modi, Xi Jinping, and Putin in China at the SCO summit. But it's a clear signaling to Donald Trump, even if the SCO summit was pre-scheduled, this coming together of these three leaders is making its own assertion of alternative power on the global stage. This as the Prime Minister raised the Pahalgam terror attack with Pakistan in the room, and a seeming marginalization of Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif saw Pakistan's Field Marshal Asim Munir rushing to China today as Prime Minister Modi left. I'm Barkha, you're with the Mojo story. On the program today, we're going to try and decode the meaning behind these viral images. The troika and then the twosome. There you see Prime Minister Modi in Vladimir Putin's car. At other moments, you've seen hugs, handshakes, whether it's a meeting between Modi and Xi Jinping, or interlinked hands with Vladimir Putin, or the three of them standing together seemingly laughing. There is strong symbolic messaging here, and there is perhaps more than symbolic messaging. For India and China, it seems almost like a reset. Remember, post-Galwan, but also more recently, given China's backing of Pakistan in Operation Sindoor, things have been frosty. Talking about Operation Sindoor, Shehbaz Sharif clearly was shown who's the real boss in his country. Today, Asim Munir, Pakistan's Field Marshal, is not just in China. He's attending all of the meetings, the delegation level talks of Pakistan, as well as some of the big one-on-one meetings. All of this is taking place as the world is wondering how far Trump is willing to take his tariff war. There are also some concerns here in India about this reset between India and China. Can India really trust China? Or is this about a cautious rapprochement? Will a cautious rapprochement be enough to basically draw red lines with Donald Trump? This, as Peter Navarro, Trump's aide, does it again. This time making a reference to quote-unquote Brahmins profiteering from the purchase of Russian oil. Brahmins in India is what Navarro said. Navarro seems to make it worse and worse for Trump, or maybe Trump is using Navarro's shoulder to shoot at India. Today, we look at whether there is indeed a new power axis that is emerging to take on Trump's hegemony, or some might say, at least Indians would, bullying. Let me introduce our distinguished panel of experts as we look at all of the implications of that SCO summit. Military veteran General Sharma is with us. Always a pleasure, sir. Also joining us is Zorawar Daulat Singh, who's of course an author and a foreign affairs policy analyst. Good to see you, Zorawar. Also joining us today is Ashanti D'Souza. She is with the Mantra Institute, which is an independent research institute. Good to see you, ma'am. And also joining us is a veteran diplomat, Ambassador Dilip Sinha. Let me actually start by playing out a little bit of what Prime Minister Modi had to say at the SCO summit. Prime Minister Modi raised a Pahalgam. The SCO passed a resolution which condemned the Pahalgam terror attack. Both of these extremely significant, given that India has very clearly blamed Pakistan for Pahalgam, and Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif was in the room in attendance at the SCO summit when this happened. Take a look.
भारत पिछले 4 दशकों से निर्मम आतंकवाद का दंश झेल रहा है। कितनी ही माताओं ने अपने बच्चे खोए और कितने बच्चे अनाथ हुए। हाल ही में हमने पहलगाम में टेररिज्म का बहुत ही घिनौना रूप देखा। इस दुख की घड़ी में जो मित्र देश हमारे साथ खड़े रहे, मैं उनका आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। यह हमला केवल भारत की अंतरात्मा पर ही आघात नहीं था, यह मानवता में विश्वास रखने वाले हर देश, हर व्यक्ति को खुली चुनौती थी। ऐसे में प्रश्न उठना स्वाभाविक है, क्या कुछ देशों द्वारा आतंकवाद का खुलेआम समर्थन हमें स्वीकार्य हो सकता है?
So let's open this up, Ambassador Dilip Sinha. I'll start with you. The Pahalgam condemnation from the SCO, I would think is significant given Pakistan's membership of the SCO, attendance of the SCO. India blocked Azerbaijan today as a permanent member, citing those concerns and links with Pakistan. We also see Asim Munir rushing to Pakistan. I know the India-Pakistan dynamic is not the most important one being observed on the global stage, but it's one that we in India would watch closely. And when you couple that with Modi's car ride with Putin, Modi, Xi and Putin standing together, huddled together in what's being called a power huddle, what do you make of this? It, of course, tells you that a few weeks is a long time in geopolitics, because till a few weeks ago, our army was talking about China's support to Pakistan in Operation Sindoor. Ambassador Sinha.
Well, yes, the world is completely unhinged right now. We don't know what is happening. There are all kinds of developments taking place, and this is one of those developments. But from our point of view, it clearly is a message to Trump to tell him that, look, we have options. If you impose tariffs upon us, we have other friends we can turn to. But let's be clear. In the speech itself, the quote that you just showed of the Prime Minister, he said that we are grateful to countries that stood by India during the Pahalgam attack. Now, yes, many countries condemned the Pahalgam attack, but when we launched Operation Sindoor, then the question is, which are the countries that stood by us at that time? And China was clearly not on our side. China was siding with Pakistan, providing operational support at that time. So there is evidently a contradiction in what Prime Minister Modi said at the meeting and what are the implications of what he said. So here we have a situation where we have a trust deficit with China, and that comes out repeatedly in the various briefings that we had. The Foreign Secretary's briefing said that Prime Minister Xi Jinping said that India-China relations should move ahead and we should keep the border issue aside. But then Foreign Secretary said that we cannot, and the border tensions will impact bilateral relations. So these are all the, when you read between the lines, you find that there are differences that came up even during this visit. And of course, we must always remember that this visit came immediately after the visit to Japan, where there was a different kind of dialogue taking place. So, all these are very contradictory signals that are being sent out both by China and Russia as well as by us. And Putin was meeting Trump just the other day in Alaska. China is holding talks with America on trade. China has not faced the kind of tariffs that we have faced, despite its relations with Russia. So we have all these contradictory signals coming out, and we have to just observe them carefully.
So I guess what you're saying, before I go to General Sharma, is the messaging is from India to Trump that there are other options, but this messaging at the moment you think is more symbolic than substantive. Ambassador Sinha?
Yes, I think so. It is telling Trump that, look, we got options. With America, we have a Trump deficit. But with China, we have more than a Trump deficit. We have a trade deficit. We have a trust deficit. So it's a message to Trump. And Trump is a problem not merely for India-US relations, but for the whole world itself, and perhaps America itself as well.
So India is placed between a Trump deficit and a trust deficit, or in other words, between a rock and a hard place. Let me bring in General Sharma. No great options in a way. Obviously, there's an assertion of strategic autonomy, assertion of sovereignty, assertion of the right to take our own decisions. I think that is without question. That for me has been the big takeaway of the last few weeks. But in the medium to long term, I think what Ambassador Sinha is saying is, with America, Trump is the issue. With China, the issues are deeper, but Trump has in a way forced India's hand on this. How do you see it?
Thank you, Barkha. The issue here is that it's an issue of multi-alignments. In any which way, we are maintaining alignments with every nation, including the United States. While President Trump's the tariffs come up and strongly, and what Peter Navarro keeps saying, and all these remarks about Brahmins and profiteering and all that, despite all that, there is multifaceted relationship with the United States, which is not going anywhere in spite of the tariffs. So there is one on a plane that we are doing. There are issues here with President Trump, but on the other plane, we got GE engines recently from United States, something which was not coming for a very long time. But despite the tariffs, the President Trump allow us to take the GE engines, which are 404, which we've been waiting for about 10 odd years. So there are many planes that things are working, and similarly for China, while it was clearly stated by the Prime Minister that and by the Foreign Secretary that there are issues on the border, but despite that, there is a bonhomie which was clearly evident. There was a body language which was clear. So the relationships, even with the nations which may be adversarial for some time, there are other relationships going along with them which are perfectly all right and which show warmth. So I think we'll have to now start sifting out as to what's exactly happening into each one of these nations that we're having relations with.
So do I hear your skepticism as well about anything deeper with China? You don't see it as a reset?
Look, there is a reset. I mean, undoubtedly there's a reset. The reset is not today. Reset started even before President Trump came into the chair. It started in October. And October would not have come if 2 months prior to October, the diplomats wouldn't have worked behind the scenes to get October going, to get about that disengagement that took place in Depsang. So the fact of the matter is, it's about a year that the behind the scenes work is on with the Chinese, and it is on. And President Trump's is coming in between in January, and actually President Trump's issues started largely after Sindoor. It's largely 2.5 months or 3 months, and then he's been worked up against us. So the fact is that all this is confused relationships, and I personally feel to find an answer to all this is not easy and not required also. Things will come out and eventually as time passes.
So let me bring in Zorawar. I think what I'm hearing both Ambassador Sinha and General Sharma say is that there's the kind of one step at a time approach right now. Nobody quite knows what the end game is. Nobody quite knows how this is necessarily going to play out. There's a lot of symbolic messaging to Trump. India has stood our ground, unlike many other countries whom we see in recent weeks basically publicly suck up to Donald Trump in the White House. I was speaking to somebody who'd worked in the Trump first administration, and I said, why is Trump being soft on Pakistan? And she said, it's very simple. They nominated him for a Nobel. You didn't. Is that what it's all down to? Because you also had the Americans tweeting today, weirdly, about the relationship between India and America reaching new heights. This says everything is unfolding in China. Zorawar.
Yeah, so I think we're underestimating certain structural trends.
We've lost your audio, Zorawar. Did you just mute yourself by mistake? I can't hear you. Could you just try again?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
How's the audio?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I think we are underestimating a larger transformation in world politics, which have been occurring for now several years now. I think it comes with the first Trump administration, which was the first sort of clarion call by I would say it was a civil war inside the US establishment that this unipolar world has become unsustainable for the United States itself. He couldn't carry on. You have this sort of the Biden pushback that comes in, which was really the deep state kind of saying, no, we're going to give it one last push. The outbreak of Ukraine, I think you have now reached a stage where India has kind of tiptoeing from this sort of, a US-centric foreign policy to a multipolar foreign policy. I think a lot of people have said it in different ways, but I think it's beyond symbolism. I think India is now investing in many of these frameworks, which by the way, it was a founding member of so many of them, right? The BRICS, the SCO. It's always had a foot in the Eurasian door, But I think now, if you look at the long view means 5 years down the line, 10 years, the geoeconomic trends are suggesting that India's economic story, if it's going to carry on the way it is, and the security of the subcontinent, can't happen without having a stable relationship with China. You saw Sindoor. I would flip it around. I think the lesson there for Indian policymakers was, if you do not stabilize the China front at a political level, you are going to be completely sort of bogged down in a far more serious military strategic situation, and no great power other than maybe Russian military technical support is going to be out there to bail you out. The US is clearly showed they want you as a maritime partner for distant flashpoints which are unconnected to India's core vital interests. So I think this is a stepping stone to India kind of going through a churning of its geopolitical identity as not just a Western sentinel in Asia, which is now passé, and kind of this emerging power, and it's going to be having its, you call it multi-alignment or whatever, but at some point, it's going to see where the center of gravity of geopolitics and geoeconomics is. And it is going to be in Asia, right? And America will be a part of that. There's no doubt. But I think the Indian establishment is now grappling with what is a major turning point, which has happened in the 50s, it's happened in the 70s, it happened in the early 90s. I think this is one of those phases. It may drag on for several years, but this is a part of that transformation.
So in other words, Zorawar, you're making the argument, unlike Ambassador Sinha and General Sharma, that actually investing in China is part of investing in multipolarity, and it's actually essential to India's security interests. Unlike, let's say, a skeptic like me, who actually thinks that China, equations with China are so adversarial, and with China sort of treating Pakistan as a vassal state, there's just such a big trust deficit. I'm so sorry, I can't hear you again. Yeah, now I can. Yeah. Now I can.
What India is portraying and signaling very clearly, directly with the Chinese leadership and the rest of the world, is our differences with China must be seen in a sense that it is the India-China equation. It is not US problems and US rivalries and alliances and problems that are going to be brought to India. So that baggage that India had, it's kind of pushing itself away. The idea was that US would provide security and advantage and leverage. It's actually becoming a weak point. So what India is doing is it's saying we're going to manage our differences with China, but those are much more manageable when they are seen in a bilateral sense than in a Cold War situation, where the Chinese are then looking at everything to the US lens, and you become a bargaining chip on the global chessboard, a dispensable chip, right? What is the Trump regime shown? That they can toss you around for leverage with other big powers. You are saying we don't want that. We might as well then have ties with all the big powers.
Got it. Shanti, is that how you see it? That India is now in a situation where trusting any single power or any single pole is actually going to be difficult. Then it's been revealed that every country will be brutally transactional, and thereby India has to probably learn the same kind of transactionalism, and hence burying whatever skepticism, at least for the moment, that India has with China, because this is important to do right now.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of uncertainty and fluidity in the international system. And as if you look at the economic rationale driving the foreign policy and national interest of various countries, particularly if you look at US, President Trump itself indicates that there is an inward-looking America which is not really interested in what's happening outside, other than President Trump's personality, which tries to seize in opportunities to project his transactionalism and his way of doing things. But that itself has led to a lot of uncertainty in the world. So we are looking at a very fluid international system, and that is changing. Thereby, I think India's relations with China, as seen now, looks like it's more of a bargaining or hedging strategy. It doesn't really mean it's a reset in the sense of, everything is fine and things are hunky-dory, but it means that India is looking at various options, and that's absolutely necessary at this point of time. So we are looking at a multi-aligned foreign policy where India is trying to protect its strategic autonomy. And I think the fact that India has relied on strategic autonomy as a weapon in its foreign policy tool-making has come to a real test at this moment. There was a little tilt towards the US, and that has been curtailed because of what Trump did with the tariffs and has pushed back India into a corner. And now India is trying to look out for relationship with China. And herein, I think I don't see a dramatic reset because, as Ambassador Sinha mentioned, there is a trust deficit. I think the border issue remains, though a special representative mechanism has been set up, but it will take a very long time to address that issue. Then India also has the issue of trade deficit. There is a trade imbalance which India has to address. But the larger issue is also the optics of success, which has been created by the Chinese. For instance, they stopped, the supply of rare earths and urea to India in June, and that created tremendous pressure inside India, particularly for the automobile and agricultural sector. And then you fast forward it to August when Wang was here, he revoked that, and this was seen as a success. So they have a way of doing things or doing business, of showing progress on certain issues, but actually it's more of symbolism rather than real issues. And the other thing is also about China looking at getting India on board with a trilateral with Russia. So is India ready to walk down that road with a trilateral with China and Russia? Or will India maintain its position of being independent, multi-aligned, and looking for new alliances and partnerships? I think the true test will come when the tariffs really start making impact in India and how far the Chinese will go. And as you rightly pointed out, the Pakistan factor obviously exists.
I will come to the Pakistan factor later, but I think two very varying perspectives from you and Zorawar, in that you believe that this is possibly transitory. India's buying time, hedging bets. It needs to respond in the short term right now. Zorawar believes that there is now an internalization, that you've got to reset your foreign policy, even if you're not resetting exclusively with China or picking a side. One of the key things is this very interesting statement from Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri that China has promised to cooperate with India on combating terrorism. Because I don't know where all of this leaves China's policy vis-a-vis Pakistan. I just want to play out the statement, the question asked to Vikram Misri and his response, and then come right back. Take a look.
Sir, how much was the discussion on the issue of cross-border terrorism, the terrorism emanating from Pakistan during the bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping?
Questions. See, cross-border terrorism was mentioned by the Prime Minister as a priority. And I would add that he did underline the fact that this is something that impacts both India and China, and that it's important, therefore, that we extend understanding and extend support to each other as both of us combat cross-border terrorism. And I would, in fact, like to say that we have received the understanding and cooperation of China as we have dealt with the issue of cross-border terrorism in the context of the ongoing SCO summit.
So, Ambassador Sinha, I want you to explain to me what this means, because till a few weeks ago, we were convinced that China was not just supplying platforms to fight India during the military conflict, Operation Sindoor, but China was going much further. And the army used the metaphor of a borrowed knife to describe Operation Sindoor. Today, we are talking about, and I think you said in your opening remarks, these are the contradictions. Today, we're talking about China supporting India on cross-border terrorism. Today, we're seeing Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan, at least in the optics, as a kind of diminished figure. There are all of these viral videos where the Pakistani Prime Minister is standing, he rushes to shake Putin's hand. You have Xi Jinping and Modi kind of walking past him. You now have Asim Munir seemingly flying in a kind of panic to China today. And are we actually saying that we are going to make an attempt to break the China-Pakistan nexus?
Well, that will be a pipe dream for us. China-Pakistan nexus started way back in the early 1960s. One of the first border disputes that China resolved was with Pakistan, and it got what it wanted in POK. Now, in this, when we talk about a reset in India-China relations, let us look at, number one, the optics of it. You had Putin and our Prime Minister hugging each other. There was no such symbolism with Xi Jinping. There it was a cold shake hand.
Yeah.
Then in the issues raised by China, did Xi Jinping raise any of the issues of concern to us? He didn't talk about terrorism. He didn't talk about trade. He didn't talk about the supply chains that he had blocked during the. We had done nothing to annoy China in the last when they stopped the supply of rare earths to us, because of which our battery industry was in deep trouble. So his statements were essentially platitudes and cliches. The elephant and the dragon must dance together, and then we are partners and not rivals. These don't mean anything. The point is, on terrorism, I'm not aware of what terrorism China faces. It faces a bit of a problem in Xinjiang. We won't talk about it. That's another story. But China otherwise doesn't face a problem about terrorism the kind that we do. And we must remember that in the United Nations, it is China that keeps blocking the sanctioning of Pakistan-based terrorists. On that, there is no relenting in China.
Yeah.
So it is one thing to say that, okay, we made an attempt to try and improve our relations, possibly because, as I said, because of the Trump factor. But otherwise, our mutual contradictions are so strong that unless these are addressed and addressed directly, I don't see how we can talk about our relations have been being reset.
General Sharma, do you agree with these concerns? It's also worth reminding everybody that there are thousands of troops still eyeball to eyeball in the high Himalayas in eastern Ladakh. So are India and China both hedging bets, waiting to see how relations emerge with America? Or is there, as Zorawar argues, a kind of internal realization that you may have problems with China, but you also have problems with America of a kind that you didn't anticipate? So now you need a door open, a window open with every major power, and you aren't going to lean one way. We were never an ally of America, but we were tilting America-wards.
So, to the last part of your question, the answer is yes. That we have to engage with everybody and in every which way that we can. But having said that, let me put China issue, in my view, in some perspective. See, I did not read into the statement given by the Foreign Secretary saying that President Xi accepted our concerns on cross-border terrorism emanating from Pakistan, and he acknowledged or wanting to do something. No, it is generically terrorism was accepted as an issue because SCO rests on the foundation of terrorism also. So I don't think that anything about Pakistan's terrorism proxy war is a low-cost option. It also suits China, and I don't think Chinese will squeeze Pakistanis to do anything on this regard. Second, Asim Munir has been invited to attend the parade day after tomorrow, and he is rushed in not for the SCO meetings, but to attend the parade. And parade is a big function. The head of states, 4-5 of them, Iran, Putin, came, all these people are attending. And in fact, we are looking forward to what Chinese are going to display at that parade. There is a large amount of speculation on. So that's a separate issue. Third, the issue about Pakistan and China fusion, I think Op Sindoor was absolutely clear. I do not say the platforms is a big thing. Platforms are important. Platform Chinese have been supplying so many other nations. We ourselves buy platform for a large number of countries from America to Russia. So that doesn't make. But it is the fusion that was evident in the networking part of it, in the systemic that they arrange, the system of systems, the kill webs, the kill chains that Chinese were able to provide to the Pakistanis that matter to us much more than the platforms that the Chinese supplying to Pakistanis. And that's not going anywhere. It's going to remain like that. So that is third. And the fourth is Chinese are the masters in economic coercion. There is no other nation which has mastered it. Now, of course, the United States is learning to do. Of course, the United States also knows the system. But you see the kind of economic coercion done by the Chinese in the last 4-5 years to Australians, to South Koreans, to Nike, to Adidas, you name it, they have been doing. So we also came under the ambit of the larger economic coercion 3-4 months ago, and that is going to remain. So sometime will they say, okay, we won't take your coal and the ships can go back, but sometime they will say, okay, the batteries are not available, so we have to live with this the coercion, and we have to plan accordingly. It's only a question of us managing our own national interests, for which the trade with the Chinese is exceedingly important. And we need to work to ensure that we don't come into this coercion and we get what we need, especially the technology part of it.
So, Zorawar, I guess, with you feeling that there is more to what's happening than just India hedging bets, my question to you would be on this fusion that we saw between Pakistan and China in Operation Sindoor, and why we think that would ever change. Even the classification of partners, the partnership that has been invoked by Xi Jinping between India and China, development partners. Can countries be development partners when one country has dominated or seeks to dominate our markets with Chinese goods? There is a kind of fear factor of, as General Sharma calls it, economic coercion there. And then there is the China-Pakistan nexus, which is the root, I think, of the skepticism that most Indians feel. How do you respond to that?
So absolutely. So I don't think anybody is kind of delusional about the geostrategic balance in the subcontinent, right? You have the US-Pakistan alliance, which continues to exist, by the way. You have a China-Pakistan military strengthening, which actually started to begin when the US was kind of weaning itself off from its retreat from Afghanistan. So if you go back to the 60s, both the US and China have taken a burden sharing arrangement to keep the Pakistan army afloat. So India has been dealing with this for a long, long time. I think the question is, how do you limit that aspect? In my understanding, I feel the Chinese response, the Pakistan card that they played now, is partly a response to the Indo-US kind of partnership that was playing out. And I think and what's happened is, that's fine. You played the US card. I think where it fell short was when it comes to the subcontinent, and I've written about this quite extensively, the balance of power strategy that India brought to the subcontinent could never really offset the US, the Sino-Pak equation, because the US-Pak aspect kind of was already melded into it. So I've called it that there's an area of agreement in the subcontinent between US and China when it comes to Pakistan. So I think what you're facing with is you're going to have to deal with a very different kind of approach. It has to be by stabilizing ties with China, building up your own military modernization from wherever you can, but it can't be just over securitized kind of an approach. And ultimately, let's face it, the Pakistan problem from India is now with nuclear conditions, large scale military outbreak is unthinkable, right? We're talking of low to short level brinksmanship, coercion, back and forth, India's doctrine of punishing Pakistan for cross-border terrorism. Now, that space, if India develops, I think Sindoor showed that you have some capabilities, but there are areas where you don't have the superiority to really bring them to the negotiating table, because the next phase, let's say round 2 or 3 of Sindoor, could be a little more escalatory. So I think the challenge there is your internal military kind of situation needs to be far more. And now that's a bigger play, right? You're talking of civil military relations, you're talking of your military industrial complex. So I think what you are doing is you're buying time for stabilizing the subcontinent, removing it from the Sino-US friction that is playing out elsewhere, the US-Russia friction that's playing out. What you're doing is you're insulating this area to the extent possible for your stabilization of your economy, security at a manageable level. So let's get sophisticated about this and not go into this black and white kind of a situation.
Sure.
Because if you play the US card in South Asia, you completely get a slap on the face from Washington and Beijing, right? Which is because of the legacy of the Cold War. So Pakistan is this spoiler, and it's found a convenient way to sort of get you from both ends. So you've got to figure out a way where you have to have a multilateral solution to this.
I actually agree with that last point that you made, and I want to take it to Shanti, that at this point, you have Trump, for whatever reasons, courting Pakistan or being soft on Pakistan, whether it's because he's flattered, whether it's because at a point he needed them for Iran, whether it's because he has business interests, a combination of all of the above, history, we don't know. It's a very different Trump approach to Pakistan than Trump 1.0. And therefore, the security challenge for India is this. You have China, which is actually a kind of patron saint for the Pakistanis, and you have America, who's wanting to rehyphenate this equation even with its choice of envoy, which Trump says will also be an envoy for all of South Asia? Shanti.
Well, I think it's true that there is a lot of hyphenation which has occurred, especially post Operation Sindoor, and I think Indian foreign policy wonks will have to take a look and rethink of how to deal with Pakistan, because one for sure, Pakistan is a spoiler and has been a scourge of terrorism. But beyond talking about terrorism, I think India needed to have a long-term Pakistan policy, and I find the deficit here. And as you rightly mentioned, the panelists were talking about, there is a Sino-Pak relationship. There's also the US-Pakistan relationship, which has been there for the decades. So in terms of planning, in terms of strategizing, in terms of taking the long view, I think the Indian foreign policy makers will have to take Pakistan factor a little more seriously than just isolating it or punishing it, because Pakistan has learned the tricks of the trade of appeasing to a certain personality, of having that reach or that connect with President Trump, which is evident in this administration, not in the earlier administration. So I think we need to look at the larger picture, look at the chips which are available. And one area I think is in what India can do in the Indo-Pacific. I think that can come out very well. I mean, it's true that these are all, far off and distant land India shouldn't get involved in. But I think India focused too much on bilateral relations with great powers and didn't look at the other powers in the region who could have had a force multiplier effect in terms of its foreign policy, especially when it takes a stand on Pakistan. Today, I think if you look at it, India has very few allies. And that is sad because India had been a leader, as you know, from the Independence Day. India was a leader for the global south, for the developing world. I think India should take that position again and reassert and realign its policy on those lines. What we're looking at today is a very neoliberal agenda, of economic transactionalism. But what happens to what India gives and does in Africa? What happens to what the aid given to Afghanistan or other such countries? I think that's not been translated into enduring influence. And we look at very short-term things. Now, for instance, this meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi, there's a lot of symbolism. We get taken up by those symbols, but we don't look at the substance part of it, and neither do we work on it. So that brings you to the structural problems of the foreign policy making, of having that long view, looking at those drivers which are necessary for having your interests protected in the long term. So Pakistan factor will continue unless I think India really rethinks and relooks and looks at ways of engaging with countries on Pakistan, putting Pakistan in a spot where it's difficult. For instance, if India and China are moving together very closely, I think one of the issues is to talk about Pakistan. And that will be the test of Chinese friendship with India. So rather than just rushing into a Chinese embrace, what is your negotiating and bargaining power at this point of time? And what do you want to get from this relationship?
So let's talk about Pakistan for a moment. And let's talk about Pakistan. I'll start with you, General Sharma. Zorawar made the point, but there's only so much up the escalatory ladder that you can go, because no country wants to be pulled into a long war, and there is the sort of nuclear threshold, and that defines a new kind of warfare. I think Master Sinha doesn't believe that China is ever going to, that nexus between China and Pakistan, what you call fusion, can ever be broken. What I think both Shanti and Zorawar are saying is, well, if you had a better relationship with China, if China didn't see you as so clearly leaning towards America, if you reasserted yourself as a major power representing the global south, could you in fact go to China and say, hey, we need to talk about your support to Pakistan. We need to talk about the fact that the Jamaat-ul-Dawa resolutions against Jamaat-ul-Dawa have been blocked by you, by your veto at the UN.
So increasingly in the discussion, I'm getting confused. So the fact is that, with the Chinese, didn't we try from 1988 onwards to 2017 to make best of relationships? The principals met 17, 18 times since Prime Minister Modi took over as Prime Minister. We had 5 treaties going. The amount that we have signed 1993 peace and tranquility till 2013, the border agreement. All things going and everything was peaceful. Even when what happened in 2020, no shot was fired, despite the fact that there is out of a hat they brought out this systemic of coming large quantum of force across into Eastern Ladakh and tied us down. We who are retired, of course, and we are watching things. We were thinking there there is a bonhoming coming up with Chinese, over a period of time. It was evident. It was writing on the wall, at that time when President Xi was visiting India in Mamallapuram, his forces were moving from Xinjiang to come down to opposite Eastern Ladakh. So, well, we tried. Okay. Now you say other part of story, Pakistan. Didn't we try? The Prime Minister landed up in Nawaz Sharif's grandchild's marriage. We invited Nawaz Sharif to come across to us in a way. In case of Pakistan, it is a different matter altogether. That country is distraught. Anytime they have grave internal troubles, it suits them to elevate the issues to India so that they can bring about nationalism within the country. So anytime they get back against the wall, they say best way is to start anti-Indianism and bring about the J&K bogey. It suits them because the army gets into a pedestal back again. And, anti-Indianism is a weapon they can now never lose on. So the fact is that while we may tremendous amount of attempts to sort out issues with the Chinese and attempts to sort out with the Pakistanis, I don't think we should use the word trust at all. There is no rationale for using the word trust. It is just that they are two neighbors. We have to live with them. We should do whatever we can to maintain. In the worst of time with the Pakistanis, they were still buying $100 million worth of cancer drugs and other drugs from India. The patients of Pakistanis, while the firing is on the line of control, were coming down to Indian hospitals. So, weren't we doing more than a bit across to look after Pakistanis? And they come across every which way in 3 to 4 years when they know that.
So, what is the purpose? What is the purpose, according to you, of this rapprochement with China? I agree with you. I would find it very difficult to trust China as an Indian. But my question to you is, therefore, what is the goal? Is the goal to have equations with everybody and manage them all on their own terms? What is the goal right now? Apart from signaling to Trump, there is a signaling to Trump. There is an assertion of strategic autonomy. There is saying we have options. But what is the medium-term goal? What should it be?
Good question. And two issues, let me say. One is that with the Chinese, we have much to take here. Where do we get things from? You buy anything of technology from any one of the other nations, Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, Vietnam, every industry belongs to the Chinese. So, if you want to develop and you want to get a developed nation in 2047, we have strong national interest to do trade with Chinese. You just can't avoid it. Between the subsidy components or other components, that's an essential part of the story. Second is the issue, as I mentioned earlier, we ought to have multi-alignments. See, we live in a difficult neighborhood. We got to maintain relations, and any way we can do so, it is a good idea. If we are able to sort out the border, I think the best thing that can happen is that there is sagacity on part of principals who can sit down together we sorted out with Bangladesh, maritime border and also the border along it. It was done through diplomacy and great amount of effort done to more give than take. We got to resolve. But to say, and I'll end here, that after the border is resolved, God willing, after our times, even if the border is resolved, because as it is, they're saying next generation sort out, this generation leave it. Even if next generation sorts out, do you think that the geopolitical challenge that the Chinese feel as another pole arising in India will die away? I mean, we will still remain to be a geopolitical challenger. 2,000 kilometers of a peninsula jutting into Indian Ocean through which Chinese trade passes through. They will be matching of hearts will take time.
So, Ambassador Sinha, I'm sure you agree with this. And that brings me to this question of Asim Munir. As General Sharma reminds us, he's here for the parade, a parade that India declined to attend. The Prime Minister has already left China as Munir reaches there. If the Pakistan-China nexus is unbreakable, if China will always look at India as a rival, not really as a partner, and yet there are all of these economic ties, some might even argue dependency, I will ask you the same question. After we are done hedging and signaling to Trump, how are we rebalancing? How are we rebalancing these equations? Or how are we hoping they will rebalance?
We must remember that we have security problems with Pakistan, and then we have security problems with China, and the two are independent of each other. what brings China and Pakistan together is the India factor. They have nothing in common with each other. There are very, very little people-to-people contact between China and Pakistan. The Chinese are scared. The Chinese workers who work in China are scared. There are regular attacks on them because they feel insecure, and they have to be provided security both by the Chinese army and by the Pakistani army. So that's the state of their relations between the two of them. What brings them together is India, and China uses Pakistan as its weapon against India. Now, we must realize that we have to engage with both these countries by all means, but realize the limitations of the engagement. With Pakistan, there are certain things as neighbors we have to engage with, whether it is on all kinds of issues, as also with China. But we must remember that we have major security problems with both countries. And we must also remember that in our foreign policy, that we, in this emerging multipolar world, we ourselves are a pole. We don't have to keep running from one country to another looking for a godfather every time we are in trouble. There are a number of countries in Asia, in this region, that are concerned about China's policy of aggrandizement. And many of them look to India for as a country that will stand up with them against China. We must be clear about this. The Philippines president was here just the other day. Our Prime Minister went to Japan. All this is part of this same policy of bringing together countries which fear China. So we have to keep this in mind, and then, given this fact, build our own economy. By all means, trade with China, but we must remember that trade with China makes us dependent upon China, as we have seen in the case of the APIs and in the case of the rare earths. So we have to also, over a period of time, develop independence of China, of our dependence on key ingredients for our economy.
General Sharma, before I come to Zorawar and Shanti, you had a point? General Sharma?
Yeah, I mean a small point. Look, firstly, Op Sindoor is not the end all of future operations that may take place, one point. And the second is, we tend to feel that all that happened in Op Sindoor was what the air wars took place. But Op Sindoor was singularly escalatory on the ground forces in J&K, where there were larger number of casualties that happened in the civilian arena as also in the military. So, it has got grossly underplayed as to what was happening in Jammu and Kashmir on the line of control, which you know better. But the fact is, it was fairly escalatory in that manner, and it, of course, 4 days. In 4 days alone, it was quite big. So, and next war, whether it will be air wars or ground wars, I don't think we should venture on it. Everything is possible. Thank you.
Okay, I'll get Zorawar to respond to that. I'll also take a comment from one of our regular viewers. Prasad says, you have to remember that the combined GDP of these three, which is India, Russia, China, how does that level up with USA? So cautious, optimistic engagement between the three is a good thing. But I want to take you to General Sharma's point that, look, what was happening in terms of artillery, ammunition, because the images of the drone warfare and the missiles were so overpowering, he's saying, don't forget that, wars can take any shape. They can take protracted tensions at the ceasefire. We could have, I beg your pardon, at the line of control, you could have the ceasefire effectively collapsing, as it did for those 4 days in Operation Sindoor. You could have war by sea, war by land, war by air. Don't assume that war will only come in the shape of these short bursts of air power. Your response to everything you've heard?
So, it's a great point that this idea was developed by NATO, especially after the first Gulf War, that modern wars are going to be these short, swift, shock and awe operations. They developed the military-industrial complex in the 90s and 2000s to fight these third world unequal actors. I think what Ukraine has showed them, the contest with Russia, is that peer competitors is a different ball game. Under nuclear conditions, your military-industrial complex can be completely demolished. Today, Western economies cannot match a GDP of Russia, which is 1/10 the size, in a large-scale, protracted conflict. Just look at what's happening. The economies are unraveling at very, very important points. I'm coming to this. So I think the lesson for India is that, yes, you are now dealing with two major nuclear weapon states with formidable conventional capabilities. But on the Pakistan front, I think it's quite manageable because you are not a revisionist state in that sense. You are not going to engage in coercion. You have to be in a position to punish them for being a spoiler. And for that, even on this day, I can say with my open source understanding, speaking to military commanders, we are in a position to hold our own. We will be in a better position to manage these crises, because eventually you want to be in a position where you don't want to go into a major escalation to send a message, right? And that's what happened. At some stage, the Pakistanis in the last phases of the 11th hour, they were running to the United States. But I think let's not get bogged down into this India-Pakistan. I mean, the whole point is we were saying we don't want to be hyphenated. We are again lowering ourselves. How are you going to elevate yourself in the subcontinent as a rising power is through your economy, through your industrial rejuvenation, your societal connects with your neighbors and beyond, right? China is now no longer going to be a second-rate power, right? Which it was there for 100 years. It's going to be a major economic force. Look at the Japanese economy, the Russian economy, Australia, Vietnam, the United States, the EU. We are the odd one out that were thinking that we are going to sort of, reinvent the wheel. And when we reach parity with China, which probably will never happen in 100 years, then we will engage with them. I think this theoretical delusion needs to be replaced with now this incremental détente, reduction of tensions on reasonable terms. Nobody is selling out on territorial matters. What have you lost? You are giving yourself a chance to stabilize your foreign policy and giving your economy. Now, who's stopping you from getting $100 billion of Chinese FDI into sectors that you want to develop, right? Your EVs, your infrastructure, there's just so many multitude of areas where if you got your act together, you can do what they did with the United States and Japan, right? You have to leverage the dominant powers of the day. You're doing it with the United States. Now, we can't keep making excuses for them. If they are going to build you up, you have to do it with the Chinese now, and you've got to do it with everybody, right? So I think we have to now go beyond the Pakistan equation. And you also, I would just say to closing point, these multilateral kind of institutions like BRICS, we've been deriding them ourselves. Indians have been spitting on what was going to be the alternative de-risking of globalization, which has a stranglehold of weaponized public goods by the West. Look at what they're doing. Now it's come to you, and now you're running around like a headless chicken because you are facing those sanctions. You have a chance to now co-write the rules in a multilateral way. All this idea that China is going to dominate these institutions, you look at the norms. You have a veto power on everything, right? You just vetoed somebody in the SCO.
Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan becoming.
You can play your cards well, but you don't have all the cards. You've got to develop them as you go along.
Shati, do you agree with that? Because there are some people who believe that Trump has actually ended up making China more powerful. You know, the one country that's walked away from with an advantage is China. I've seen a lot of American commentators make that point. I think Zorawar is saying just leverage China for what it can add to your economy and then use the heft in your economy to assert strategic power.
Absolutely. I think what has happened with the Trump administration, and particularly President Trump's policy, it has enhanced China's leverage and given it that potential to emerge as a counterforce and an important power in the region. And also the fact that for India, I think even beyond China and US, I think it has to look at other options as well. It has to look at countries where it can build some enduring relationships. And this has to be long-term relationship. So with great powers, there's always this element of transactionalism. And even if you're looking at transactionalism, I think you need to look at it in a different prism. If you're looking at China, of looking at conflict resolution in the long-term view, you can look at the confidence-building mechanisms which had been in place from the 80s and 90s, and what really occurred there. So, contentious issues like the border can be put on the back burner. You can look at greater economic engagement, work on leverages you have with China, look at more in terms of investment which can come in China, point out to areas where you actually can build that synergies and not really the other way around that the Chinese dictate what they want to do. I mean, the Chinese are open in terms of what you can do with their economy, but it's always the fear. I think it's for one moment, if India needs to arrive and be a major power on the global stage, it is to actually look at the ideas which are floating around and take it on board. I mean, there is considerable amount of distrust and fear, but I think that shouldn't really stop India from engaging with China. But also look at other countries in the region. First is the neighborhood, which I think is very critical and has been not given that importance it should have been, and then gradually expand outward. Look at other groupings where India can play a leadership role. And I think there is enough platforms and avenues for India, for the foreign policy makers to pick up those and make the dent or the mark for India to arrive on the global stage.
Let me, before I take very quick closing comments, let me come to the question we haven't actually addressed. What happens next with America? The United States chose today of all the days to tweet out an image with Marco Rubio. Could we please bring that up? With Marco Rubio on the graphic, talking about how Indo-US relationships are going to reach new heights, etc., reaching new heights. And a lot of people looked at that and said, okay, are they feeling the heat? In the meantime, Navarro did what Navarro does. Navarro is one of Trump's key aides. This time he used a phrase which irked Indians across the board. He's been talking about how the rich of India are profiteering from the purchase of Russian oil. Today he said the Brahmins of India are profiteering from the purchase of Russian oil. Take a look.
Look, Modi's a great leader. I don't understand why he's getting to bed with Putin and Xi Jinping when he's the biggest democracy in the world. So I would just simply say to the Indian people, please understand what's going on here. You got Brahmins profiteering at the expense of the Indian people. We need that to stop.
So I'll take closing comments now. Zorawa, what next with the US, given that Navarro seems to triple down on making really provocative, inflammatory comments day after day, very personal comments? What do you see happening with the US?
So there's this impression that, if we could just go back to the way things were, that if the way things were was, we've been facing a structural problem with the United States. It's time to now rebalance and restore a new equilibrium with them. I'm talking of re-engagement on terms that now you can manage, you can absorb new technologies, you gain from them. But this idea that you are going to be this swing power that is going to be huddling with them is going to draw you into things which you don't want to get into. So I think, Indians have themselves let themselves into a bit of a corner where they have pitched that India is the swing power and we can be there for you, and that will sort of build you up. I think you got to change it, make it bilateral, focus on if this old belief that a strong India is good for the West, then let's act upon it. And we are there to provide America any kind of, technological collaboration on good terms. But this idea of technology transfer must happen. If you're saying immigration, you don't want, Indians can go elsewhere, right? Let's change the format. Let's not start bargaining on things that no longer suit the American middle class, because ultimately Trump was a revolt of the American middle class on the old foreign policy. They can't sustain that. The sooner you realize that it's a changing America, will give you a chance to reset what is viable, realistic for you.
Shanti, do you agree? Changing America needs a different Indian response?
Yes, I think, but as we speak, I mean, whatever is occurring with the Indian-Chinese embrace, there's also this 2+2 intersessional meeting going on with the Americans. So I think India is balancing a lot of things. It's not, beyond the optics, I think India has to keep all its cards open. And rightly so, I think this the problem, I think, with the foreign policy is the tilt. It tends to go a lot in terms of statements, in terms of symbols, in terms of optics, and just doesn't focus on the substance. So I think we have to work on the structural constraints which are existing and look at drivers which will build long-term relationship and give us that leverages. So we have to look for the leverages both inside US and China.
General Sharma, closing thoughts? General Sharma, I can't hear you, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, I can now. Yeah.
Yeah. So the muting is done by the.
Sorry, this is our fault. Yes.
So the point is that we do not wish to be hyphenated or dehyphenated, but the with Pakistan, but we have a border which has the propensity to get hot at a moment's notice. And then, of course, there is sponsorship of terror, which you just can't avoid, including Pakistan in a thought process that they would one day will find an excuse to do another larger issue of terror around. So that's one issue. The second is that it's only finally the economy. We have to grow. We are a developmental nation. We need to develop, and any assistance that we can get from anywhere, which way, whether it's China or United States, we must work to the end that we must get it. And my last point is that, look, I found some positives in the statements given, the 10-point consensus and the 10-point roadmap given out, one by the NSA and by the External Affairs Minister in their discussion with Wang Yi. The early harvest now on the border. See, border is tense. You like it or not, don't like it, LAC is tense. There is a large amount of deployment across the borders. It's not the best of times, the best of atmospheres existing on the LAC, while we can have Bonhomme in Tianjin or wherever.
Yeah.
So the point I was to raise is that the early harvest, let's see in times how the early harvest gets converted into something tangibles. While we have relented a bit and we have said, okay, we'll accept a piecemeal approach on border settlements, something that we were not following earlier. And if we accept the early harvest and take on, say, Sikkim and the central sector, maybe at least there is a progress here. If it gets translated into tangibles, then I think that would help us bringing about some better relations with China on the overall front.
Ambassador Sinha, I'll give you the last word. You've said on my previous programs that one has to, one can't get pulled down to Navarro's level. But he seems to have emerged as a sort of chief spokesperson for whatever's going on right now on behalf of Trump. I mean, there's a reason he's everywhere making these comments. What do you see unfolding with the United States of America, given everything that's just happened at the SCO?
Well, Navarro and Trump are both bad news. Now, but then we must go back and look at what was the original issue that got Trump riled. That was the trade imbalance. And Trump is correct over there. You cannot have trade imbalance with a country.
But do you really believe it's about trade? I mean, or it's a personal peak, as many people seem to believe.
The peak came later. The starting point was the trade deficit, which he's been wanting to address. And I think we should look at, of course, the post-Trump era, but then we'll have to look at the fact that we have to address the trade imbalance, and we should look for ways in which we can address the trade imbalance with the US, and also tell both Russia and China they must also address the trade imbalance with India. If China is really serious about improving relations with India, then it must address the trade imbalance. And that is not through investment in India by buying up our property. It has to come through buying more goods from India. And the same applies to Russia. It is only this that can give an indication that these countries are genuinely interested in improving relations with India, and also ensuring that India's economic development also takes place, rather than creating economic dependence upon these countries. Remember, even with the Trump tariffs fully coming into effect, America will still be a bigger market for India than both Russia and China put together.
Well, a lot to think about. I can only say that India's geopolitical strategy has never felt so unpredictable. It's going to have to be very agile, I think, in the months to come, and adapt very quickly to changing circumstances, including, by the way, let's not forget that Trump could also cut a deal with the Chinese. So I think there is no option but to invest quite seriously in multipolarity and have equations with all significant powers, but also, as was reminded to us on this program, with smaller countries, smaller nations, and emerge as a major force that speaks for the global South. We leave it there. To Ambassador Sinha and General Sharma, to Zorawar, and to Shanti, thank you, and to our audience, thank you, and see you soon. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.